Hi everyone and welcome. In this special recording, I'm going to be talking about the upcoming Venus retrograde season starting on the 14th of May and lasting until the 26th of June 2020. Venus is going to be stopping and standing still in the sky on the 13th of May, and that is when the official retrograde season begins. And this day is really significant because when the planet stands still in the sky, its symbolism is greatly amplified. Because that is the moment when it stands closest to our planet, so naturally its effects, its symbolism, its energies are that much amplified. Now, as all retrogrades, when the planet moves backwards, its symbolism is turned inwards. Its effects are much more psychological. Its powers and its energies manifest much more internally than externally, but this is also a very good opportunity, giving us the chance to have a greater degree of saying, decision, influence over the symbolism of that planet and how it plays out in our lives. Now, I must also mention that in physical reality, there isn't actually a retrograde because the planet never goes backwards, it never moves backwards. It is merely an optical illusion we see from planet Earth, but regardless, it has a great influence on the energies and the psychological effects on the planet. So that is why retrograde is really important from an astrological perspective and not as much from a physical perspective. Now, Venus is a personal planet. It is considered by the ancients the lower benefic, Jupiter being the higher one. So, first of all, that means that its influence is going to manifest in our personal lives, and that is going to have an indirect effect on outer reality and on the collective, so to speak. So, this is a very powerful and important personal planet because her symbolism has much to do with love, with matters of the heart, value. Her symbolism has much to do with her two houses because her daytime expression is the sign of Libra, where her symbolism is much more philosophical. It has much to do with thought, it has much to do with inner principles, whereas her nighttime expression is in the sign of Taurus, where the ancients considered her to be the earthly Aphrodite, and this is where her symbolism is embodied. This is where her powers are much more material and have much more effect on our physical reality and our bodies, so to speak. So Venus rules the matters of the heart. It represents love, it represents attractions, it represents sympathy. It has also very much to do with our self-worth, with beauty, what we find beautiful, what we find valuable, what we find to be a blessing in our lives, and that is why she is the lower benefic. Because everything pleasant, everything beautiful, everything that generates a feeling of love and appreciation is actually a blessing in our lives. Venus has also much to do with our own personal magnetism, what we attract in our lives, of course, depending on which area of our lives has our Venus. That is our main attractive force. That represents the power of our attraction, our beauty, may it be physical, may it be intellectual, spiritual, emotional, it doesn't really matter. And of course, also Venus's connections with other power players in the sky influences our psychological tendencies of the matters of the heart, of love, attraction, sometimes in alliances, values. May those be emotional values, intellectual values, but of course, currency, money, the flow of money, how we transmute the money into bigger and smaller pleasures of life, into practicality, into fulfilling our needs. But of course, this is also valid for any kind of love because many things in our life are actually based on love, on whatever we wish to attract in our lives. So, our one on one alliances, for example, ruled by Libra, have much to do with what we love, the archetype of those people who we wish to have in our lives who are a great addition, a value in our lives, but of course, this is perfectly valid, vice versa. And even the negative expressions of this energy are quite useful because that is how we learn. That is how we can see ourselves more objectively because we look at what we project upon other people and what other people project upon us, and this gives us a mirror reflection of who we are, of who others are, and our relations, so to speak. Now, Venus can influence everything in our lives, including our jobs, our hobbies, an activity that we like, where we wish to be physically, because all those things are basically based on attractions, whatever we think as valuable, whatever we hold as precious, whatever we associate with love and the feeling of pleasure, of being free, being ourselves, the ability to love ourselves, to give ourselves the pleasure, to give ourselves the satisfaction, to fulfill our needs, whatever we wish to attract in our lives. So Venus is actually a very relevant and powerful personal planet because her symbolism is mixed into so very many things in our lives, and sometimes they're not that obvious. Sometimes we do not know that our drive, our instincts, whatever we wish to accomplish in our lives are actually rooted in love and what we love and hold as valuable. So understanding her symbolism and our own relationships to her symbolism can be quite liberating. It can offer us a great chance to know ourselves that much better. Now, in the present moment, Venus is in the sign of Gemini, and this is where her retrograde is going to be taking place. Now, the sign of Gemini has much to do with the minds, with the practicality of our minds, our learning abilities, our mental skills, our intellectual capacity, but of course also the way we communicate, the way we relation to other people, mostly verbally, through speech, through writing, through communication, through sharing information, the flow of information. So this is also perfectly valid for the internet, for the online community, because there was once a time when the internet belonged exclusively to Aquarius, because it was that much futuristic, it was that much technology based, ruled by Uranus, of course, the higher octave of Mercury, the ruling planet of Gemini. But now, as the years went by, as it evolved, it's also included in the symbolism of Gemini, because it's a really practical tool that is basically available to everyone, each and every person on the planet. This is a possibility, if this is an option. So basically, the sign of Gemini in modern times, in modern astrology, rules much more than short distance travels, than basic communication and basic learning, because on one hand, it took on itself a lot from the symbolism of Aquarius, all the things which Aquarius used to rule, as in the futuristic sign, but also it inherited part of the symbolism of Sagittarius, its higher octave, its higher expression. So the sign of Gemini is also somewhat philosophical. It has to do with the freedom of mind, the freedom of thought. We can embody and use our principles in a very practical manner, and of course how we share this with the world. Now, the sign of Gemini also rules our learning abilities, what we pick up in primary school, our basic education, but since it inherited a little bit of the Sagittarius symbolism, it isn't limited to only that. It isn't limited to primary school basic education, because the internet, our interhuman connections, make it possible for us to learn everything truly. Every material that is available online gives us a chance to learn whatever it is, even if it doesn't fall under the rulership of Gemini. So basically, since Gemini received the symbolism of the internet, it has rulership over it. It gives it a much more unlimited, unbound, unrestricted expression. So even before the retrograde begins, we can already see the hidden logic, the rationality in Venus being in the sign of Gemini, because in this present moment in time, when we're all affected by the coronavirus, social distancing, all the global turmoil, so to speak, we take all of our matters onto the internet, and that is where we hope to seek resolution, hope to seek our interhuman connections, even matters of love, online dating, being loving to other people by sharing loving information on the internet. And of course, it also has to do with our own personal preferences and philosophies, because all the information we receive, all the controversial information, all the conspiracies, all the new theories, even the fantasy, even arts, even beauty, even like the multimedia content, everything like that, we are basically dependent of it in the present moment, because there isn't any other way, any other possibility through which we can experience all those things. So the internet, our interhuman connections, and of course the practicality of our minds is a very important tool to delivering all these aspects, important aspects of life onto us. So basically, we can also be looking at this big astrological picture as if very many elements of our lives which didn't belong to the sign of Gemini or the symbolism are right now compacted into it, because physical reality doesn't allow us to experience it in any other way. And also an important element which has nothing to do with the Venus retrograde on its own is the North Node, the nodes of the moon, moving into the Gemini-Sagittarius axis. So that represents that humanity's collective karmic path is going to be hosted by the sign of Gemini, which has everything to do with our minds, our thoughts, the duality present in our minds, and we are invited to purify it, to give it a totally new, safe and sound structure, so that our negative thoughts, the pollution of our minds, and the contradicting information reaching us doesn't affect us that much more. So basically, all of this is preparing us for the future. And what a beautiful preparation is by starting all of this with the Venus retrograde. Now, of course, Venus retrograde is not going to be an easy energy. There's no doubts about it, because Venus herself is rather uncomfortable in this sign of Gemini. It's air energy, it is dual, it is mutable. Venus actually likes commitment, Venus likes stability, Venus likes permanence. Venus has a very Korean type of rules and regulations which govern the morality of love, so to speak. So she likes to protect, preserve certain principles, the sanctity of love, the morality of love. Whereas in the sign of Gemini, all of these are not offered to her, because it's a highly mutable air energy. So basically, the only thing that matters is if it exists in your mind and not as much in physical reality. But since it exists in the mind primarily, you can alter it, you can change it, you can readapt it, adjust it. So that's why she doesn't have that sense of permanence. But even though she is not able to bring out her highest qualities, which is unconditional love, which is, for example, the heavy romantic vibes when she is in Pisces, her exalted sign, even her sensual expression like when she's in Aries. So she is kind of limited by all this air energy, because air energy doesn't allow her to focus all her symbolism, all her energy into singularity, so to speak, because Gemini is all really dual energy, the twins. We can perceive this as the matters of the heart, Venus and Gemini, absolutely, but there's also the mental sphere, there's also the logic. Does love have logic to it? And if it does, it's definitely not human logic, it's definitely not the logic we may think it is, because as they say, love has her own logic, love has a mind of her own, so it's not going to be straightforward. But of course, like with any other aspect, this also has a great potential to it. There is a hidden blessing in this, because it makes it that much easier to mentally analyze, perceive what love is for us, to look at ourselves from an objective perspective, because that is one of the blessings of Gemini, the twins. You can somehow detach and just look at yourself from the viewpoint of an outsider, so you will get the chance to notice how you enact your love, how you embody your love, how loving you are to other people, and what your reactions are when you receive love, appreciation, admiration, when you are a value in the lives of others. So this is a really, really good air energy to discipline our minds, so that when a moment comes when we have to make a certain decision, we can harmonize the matters of the heart space, with our intellect, with our minds, with our logics, so that it won't be a big inner conflict. But until we get the chance to acquire that self-discipline needed, a Venus retrograde in the sign of Gemini is a very beautiful energy to give us exactly this chance to get to know ourselves that much better, to get to know what we love authentically, and to eliminate illusions, or at least to have a clarity of what compromises we are willing to accept and which compromises we have to eliminate from our lives, because they might be preventing us from loving as authentically as possible. So this is a really good opportunity to just train ourselves how to embody and to identify authentic love, how to make the difference between love and lust, how to make the difference when we love something from the deep core of our beings, and when we love something for really practical, logical reasons, that they are either joyful, they give us pleasure, they give us some kind of benefit which is really important in our lives. So of course we have the tendency to feel love because it's so practical. May it be a person, may it be an activity, may it be a hobby, may it be absolutely anything that is based on our feelings. Now usually when Venus is in the sign of Gemini, it is associated with a highly confusing energy because of the duality of the twins. For you have the tendency to rethink, to reevaluate, to reconsider, to analyze the feelings, matters of the heart, your inner drive, your inner motivation from various different perspectives. Yes, of course, logically, the opinions of others, the opinions of relevant people, like maybe an expert, a psychologist, a spiritualist, a priest, a cleric. But of course, it gives you the chance to dive into a more emotional type of intelligence, where you try to understand yourself more intuitively. But regardless of how you do it, regardless how you battle through the confusion, so to speak, when you receive any type of clarity, when you draw any kind of conclusion, that is already a great advantage, because knowing yourself, understanding yourself, means understanding others that much more. So it is a really good psychological and intellectual energy to find out what love is, what love represents for you, and how it manifests in your life. Now, if I have said that Venus in the sign of Gemini is confusing energy on its own, well then imagine when Venus is retrograde, what it's going to do to our minds. It will send all of us into a certain type of duality, which can be playing out differently for different people, because we all have the sign of Gemini in different parts of our personal skies. But it doesn't matter where it is. What matters is that it's definitely going to be highly confusing. It's going to be really dual. It's going to involve the past, because retrograde, when the planet goes retrograde, it also evokes the past. It evokes how we lived through this at previous times in our lives. It evokes the wisdom, the experiences we had back then. It's giving us a chance to do a big retrospective of the matters of the heart. And the part of this energy which has to do with the past can be really important, because as soon as Venus starts her retrograde, when she stops and stands still in the sky on the 13th of May, she's already forming a square, a celestial aspect of maximum tension with Neptune. Now, this is really important because Neptune is the higher octave of Venus. Now, if Venus is love, Neptune is unconditional divine love, love of the source, which is limited basically because we cannot experience it in its most idealistic way as human beings, because that would be a big shock for us. It would simply distort our human experiences. So this is a highly spiritual energy, but since Neptune is in the sign of Pisces, which has to do with the past, chances are, first of all, it's going to take us back to our past relationships, to everything that has to do with the matters of the heart, but how it has been in the past. For some people, it may not be romantic feelings, but rather has to do with a job, a hobby, a career choice. It might have to do with their own self-worth and how their families treated them and what impact their education has left. All of this has actually much to do with love, because self-worth is based on the ability to love yourself and to love who you are, the identity which you have given to yourself. But to add to this, Neptune is also the planet of illusion, the planet of confusion, the planet of emotional unclarity, its shadow expression. So when we put the two together in a conversation of tension, well, that spells big confusion. That spells that from an emotional perspective, from the perspective of the matters of the heart, we are definitely going to struggle to find our inner truth. We're definitely going to struggle to make sense of the past and what lessons maybe or empowerment the past is able to bring forth to our lives. It is also going to have to do with the future. For at the very end of this retrograde, Venus is going to be receiving a beautiful trine, a celestial aspect of supreme harmony from Saturn, standing from Aquarius, the sign of the future. But before we get there, before we get to the reward, our personal rewards of going through this Venus retrograde, because that's how I personally see the trine it receives from Saturn, as a celestial karmic reward for doing all this inner work that we are invited to do with the Venus retrograde. But before we get there, it's going to be really confusing. For some people, it can be escapism, it can be trying to run away, trying to immerse into something to get away from the chaos and the chitter-chatter of the mind, self-defeating thoughts, because the shadow side of Venus is repulsion, it is rejection. So sometimes we might reject our own dramas, our own self-victimization tendencies. Neptune in Pisces, the negative expression of this. So for some people, this is going to be like a massive war, a conflict with themselves, where one part of the Gemini energy is trying to prove one perspective, one point of view, whereas in the other part of the being, especially the subconscious one, the repressed one, the hidden one, might just throw blockages, self-defeating thoughts, fears, insecurities, moments of low self-worth onto us. But what ultimately this energy represents is the necessity to find a greater degree of balance, because when the twins are in harmony with each other, when the sign of Gemini uses that duality in a very constructive way, when your shadow and your ego are in perfect harmony with your soul, well, then that is already a very good, positive energy of progress, of practicality, of doing great things. Now, for other people, this can be rather more spiritual, where all the turmoil playing out in the world stage, and where everything that they see on the internet, the TV, media, the journalists, it will confuse them, it will create dark night of the soul moments for them, because it takes away their faith, it disconnects them from their spirituality, it sends them into fear, it sends them into doubt, it sends them into self-victimization, feeling sorry for yourself, feeling lost, feeling alone, feeling abandoned. Now, for other people still, this can play out in a totally different way, where they just immerse into their own illusions, their own idealism. They basically blind themselves with their naivety and their idealism, their idealistic tendencies, and that will definitely lead them to form unwise relationships. Perhaps this means attracting a toxic narcissist into your life, or confusing love for lust, where someone may feel really, really attracted to your body, but who you are as a human being may represent absolutely nothing to them. So, definitely for some people, this will mean unwise relationships and unwise alliances. For others, still, this can also mean challenges, criticism, dissatisfaction on the internet and whatever they share. Another negative expression of this energy regarding the world stage can be manipulations, lies, deceptions, fake news, conspiracies, especially that during this time Pluto is also going to be retrograde. So Pluto in Capricorn is abuse of power, but also manipulation from centralized power. So this can definitely represent a mediatic warfare. It can represent ideological principles and their battles on the internet, on the online community. It can represent verbal battles, battles with communication where people just criticize one another, where they express their contradictory opinions and they will clash. This can also be a rather challenging energy for established bonds, people who are partnered already, because it can just make them question the authenticity of their partners, the authenticity of their relationship, if the love and solidarity that they share with one another is actually based on true soul level love, or is it just necessity, if it's just cooperation for the sake of survival. This energy can have us question almost everything in regards to love, in regards to value, in regards to everything that has to do with the matters of the heart. Most definitely, this is also going to have financial implications because Venus rules currency, it rules money, it rules material wealth. So, this can also cause a big revolution. People simply abandoning the old value systems suddenly out of nowhere for no true reason. They just feel an inner calling to make significant sudden changes in their lives. This can most definitely affect cryptocurrency, the rise of cryptocurrency, so to speak, and also the crash of the traditional value systems, cash free societies. It can also make the stock market be really chaotic, unpredictable, because, if Venus is in the sign of Gemini, if the mind has a certain degree of control over the heart, well, then that means that much less self discipline. That means breaking free from the routines without any big efforts having to be made in this sense. But another way it can manifest on the world stage is that we do not no longer trust science and technology, in the sense that we might question the motives. We might question if there's a hidden motive in all of it. For example, let's say that if they create a vaccine, people are going to reject it and refuse it because that is what they feel. They might not need any rational logic, rational explanation. It's just Venus and Gemini. That's what they feel, that's what they express. Simple as that. For others, still, this can represent the typical expression of Venus retrograde, where they might go and make cosmetic procedures, where they might change their style, where they might change their wardrobe, where they might get a totally new haircut, new hair color, anything that has to do with your image. May it be the physical image, or may it be your social media account, or everything that represents who you are indirectly. So chances are, if you really feel the need to make these changes, you shouldn't, because this is a highly confusing energy, and once Venus retrograde is over, you might feel totally differently about whatever changes you made. So the wisest choice is to just wait it out. If you feel strongly about something, of course think about it, but don't make a sudden decision. Every decision regarding big cosmetic and aesthetics changes, or forming relationships or breaking up relationships, should be delayed until the end of this Venus retrograde period, because might feel absolutely in a different way about everything once this energy lifts, once we reach a certain kind of clarity. And as I said earlier, when Venus receives a trine from Saturn, now that is grounding energy, that is reality, that is waking up from the Neptunian dream, from the illusion, from the fantasy. So we should definitely be waiting with all our decisions until at least the 18th of June, when this beautiful trine is going to be formed between Venus and Saturn, both retrograde. So when Saturn is retrograde, that means a clear inner judgment. That means the ability to decide. That means that we're our own bosses, and we are more aligned with physical reality than any time else. Now, another thing I would like to mention before I get into the aspects is that since Neptune is so powerful in the sign of Pisces, and Pisces has much to do with escapism, and Venus is in a sign, in a part of the sky which has to do with the intellect and the mind, this may represent, the square between the two planets may represent a powerful desire to escape. Now, if we read, if we watch movies, if we actually enact these as fantasies, it's not that harmful. But when we take substances like alcohol and dangerous drugs, so to speak, those can be lethal. Those can represent a big danger, because this gives us a tendency to go in extremes, to overdo it. The twins, the duality. Duality can mean living it to the maximum, which is very, very dangerous. So we should really, really be careful when deciding to do any of these activities. We should always keep a certain type of balance, because that is definitely the healthy way to go about everything. Now, the potential of this Venus retrograde season is that of mental clarity, mental healing, healing the past traumas caused by failed relationships, disciplining our minds, accepting the fact that matters of the heart should be felt in the heart, and human logic, the rationality of our minds, shouldn't be allowed to interfere that much. There should be a healthy separation between the two, but at the same time, there has to be bridges between the two, because sometimes in life we need a harmony, an equilibrium between the mind and the heart, so that we can make the wisest decisions and choices for ourselves. And this is the big potential of this Venus retrograde season, to align, to create harmony, to create a certain symbiosis between our mental spheres and between the intelligence, the divine logic in our heart. So one of the aspects that are going to be really influential is the one I mentioned before, the square with Neptune, the higher octave of Venus. And this energy is definitely extremely confusing. Confusion will reach us from the outer reality, as in from the media, from the internet, wherever, but also from the inside. So it's that much more confusing. This is the kind of energy where our intuition can actually be playing tricks on us, where we might not look at ourselves that much objectively, so we might make totally uninspired judgments, we make totally uninspired decisions. There is a very big chance for bias, for extreme subjectivity, and chances are, all through this period, we might not even realize, or we might not even consider the fact that we might be wrong. We might be feeling all of this as in the most authentic truth that lives inside our beings, when in fact it's just a Neptunian kind of illusion. Our fantasies, our wishful thinking, or maybe quite the contrary, our depressive tendencies taking a grip on our beings. But since the source of this energy is spiritual, Neptune, the solution is also spiritual, where when we are not sure of something, when we simply cannot make a decision, when our hearts and minds are at total war with each other, then we can always ask for divine guidance, we can always ask for divine help, and ultimately we can ask experts, spiritualists, psychologists, people who dedicated their lives to studying the matters of the psyche, the matters of the subconscious and the soul. So there's always help out there, regardless if you're living the extreme positive expression of this, as in fantasies and illusions, or the negative expression of this, as in depression and self victimization. Now, on the 22nd of May, Venus is going to be meeting Mercury in the sky, and this is a really good energy because Mercury is the ruling planet of Gemini. So basically, it is the king of Gemini being in its own sign, hosting Venus retrograde, and this can be a moment when our mental spheres, when the practicality of our minds, our words, our communications are going to be greatly empowered. So this is a moment in this larger Venus retrograde period when our minds are going to hold the truth, and when our rationality, our rational clear thinking, our down to earth thinking is going to help us navigate through this energy. And that is the moment when we have to give way to invite our minds, our rationality, our intellect to be the guiding light in our lives. Then on the 24th of the month of May, we have a conjunction between Venus, the Moon, and Mercury in the sign of Gemini, and this is also really powerful energy because when the Moon is in the picture, the symbol of our souls and emotional worlds, our creative feminine energies, then that gives us the chance to realign the matters of the heart because it is the calling of the soul. If we perceive and understand the rationality of our intellect through our souls and see truth in it, then that is that much easier to align our hearts, to tell our hearts, well, look, I know that you feel this and that you're a little bit confused, but the mind is correct right now, and you should give way to the intellect to guide you, to be your guiding light, the light of the mind, the light of the intellect. That can be the most wisest inner decision that we can make, to just give way to our intellects to steer us and to guide us, and not to allow the confusion of the heart to get that much in the way. This is the energy where we can actually beat the illusions of Neptune and reach a certain kind of clarity. Now, another very important moment is the 4th of June, when Venus retrograde is going to be meeting the Sun in the sign of Gemini, and this is also a really beautiful energy because the Sun means clarity. It means the light of our souls, our sense of identity, and the Sun in Gemini is a really beautiful, light-hearted, playful, supportive energy. So when Venus is going to meet the Sun in this part of the sky, it's going to change the tone, where the confusion, where all the heavy psychological energy that we might have felt at the beginning of the Venus retrograde period can be processed, can be taken much more lightheartedly. We can detach, we can even perceive it in a very funny and lighthearted manner. So this takes us out from the aura of great severity, of seriousness, of the drama. And of course, the Sun also provides clarity. It provides us with very useful information, very practical information, communication. And Sun in the sign of Gemini is maybe the opinions of other people, those who are really close to us, who are going to help us ground, who are going to help us reach clarity, who are going to give us all the necessary and useful feedback. Now, on the 6th of June, the Sun forms the full moon phenomenon taking place in the sign of Sagittarius. Full moon represents the opposition of the Sun and the Moon, so the Sun is in Gemini and the Moon is going to be in the sign of Sagittarius and conjunct Venus. So this is a really powerful revelatory energy which has the potential to dispel the confusion, to help our minds ground, to help us find our inner truth. We can draw really significant and powerful conclusions of this bigger Venus retrograde season, because full moons always represent a closure, and many times that closure is bestowed upon us by information, by revelation, by being able to see and understand things clearly. And since it's taking place in the sign of Sagittarius, it has much to do with our inner truth, with our own life philosophies, with our spirituality, so to speak. And of course, with legal matters, international travels. All of these belong to the symbolism of Sagittarius, so this may indicate not just the conclusions and the clarity and the resolution of this Venus retrograde season in our own personal lives for ourselves, but it can also indicate that all the restrictions and the measures against the coronavirus can be relaxed, where international travel and communication and all that resume. And there's also going to be legal implications because Sagittarius is also the sign of the law. So for many people, whatever conclusions they reach might also be expressed legally, where either the bigger expression of what law is, the legislation of a country or the legislation of the international world, adapts and changes. A moment of completion or a closure is going to be playing out on the world stage. And Venus retrograde is part of this. It is a contributing factor to the external change. Now, also, Venus retrograde is going to be squaring Mars in Pisces, and this energy might represent the necessity to take action. It can be like physical action, it can be coming up with a decision, a choice, expressing your desire, but since it's in the sign of Pisces, it can also represent performing inner changes, making decisions for yourself, breaking away or purging, healing the past, freeing your mind, freeing your heart from things that no longer belong there, finding forgiveness, healing yourself, making the best choices for yourself, even if those choices are very hard, very difficult, and they require a lot of effort, a lot of emotional power, so to speak. And then, last but not least, on the 18th of June, Venus is receiving a conversation of supreme harmony, a trine from Saturn in Aquarius, and Saturn is also going to be retrograde, so it's going to be making its way, slowly but surely making its way back into the sign of Capricorn, and this is an energy of blessing, where finally we can embody all the turmoil, all the confusion, all the inner work that we have performed in this Venus retrograde season. This is the time when we're going to get the rewards of our actions. May it be just inner work, may it just be digging deep in our own souls to come up with answers and to obtain self-discipline. Now, in conclusion, this Venus retrograde is not going to be an easy energy. It's going to be really challenging for very many people, especially those who do not know themselves sufficiently, who do not know their hearts and their emotional worlds in a very advanced manner, those who do not possess a great deal of emotional intelligence. because for them it's going to be difficult not just regard to what they feel, but also what others show them, what others project onto them, however others are going to behave with them. So this is going to be a really confusing energy. It's going to lead to moments of depression or moments of great illusions and fantasies, not living real life, so to speak. For those who are in an established bond, this is definitely going to have them question the authenticity of their relationship, but ultimately it can lead them to much greater stability, to true love, the consolidation of their relationship. While for those who are single and looking, this may represent moments of great solitude, feeling very lonely, feeling sad that you don't have someone who you can share your ideas, your love, your feelings with. While for artists and spiritualists, this is going to be like a very surreal, very outer body type of energy, which can play out in so many various different ways, but ultimately is going to lead them to embodying their arts and their artistic talents, their philosophies, their deep thinking that much more. So, regardless of how we look at this, for each and every one of us, this Venus retrograde season may not be easy, but it's definitely a great potential to master ourselves, to declutter of our minds, to make sure that our minds and our thoughts and our subconscious programs serve our greatest good and not work against us. It's going to have big moments of truth, big moments of sudden realization, moments of clarity where we break away from the past, but also can embody the person who we wish to become in the future. And it can also heal our relationships with others, our relationships with ourselves, and we can also tap into the true value, the true worth of our intellect, because that is the North Node in Gemini entering in that part of the sky in May. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you find all this info useful. Again, I'm really sorry for making it way too long and boring, but my sun and moon signs are both Gemini, so I just couldn't stop myself. I just had to express all the info that came into my mind. Also, I would like to mention that if you find this Venus retrograde period hard, if you find it difficult to navigate through, I'll be here. I'll be guiding you. I'll be sharing my wisdom with you to help you navigate through this really confusing period. Thank you so much again for listening. Wish everyone a great day. Bye for now.